Hello, everyone. My name is Hanbo, and today we're doing an Ask Me Anything with Dr. Michael Littman. He is a distinguished professor of computer science at Brown University, and his professional work focuses primarily on machine learning and decision making under uncertainty. And he has received various Best Paper Awards and is extremely engaged within the community. So, on that note, Mr. Littman, I know that you're extremely passionate about reinforced learning. So for those who are watching the video and don't know what that is, could you provide some general information and like the work that you have done with it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me on. Well, I think it helps to provide a little context, right? So within computer science, there's a bunch of sub areas of study. One of them is called artificial intelligence. Within artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence is about trying to get computers to behave in ways that we think of as intelligent. It's not a super duper formal definition, but it's that kind of work, right? Getting computers to compute the sorts of things that like people can compute. Within that area, there's a sub area called machine learning. In machine learning, the idea is to set about trying to satisfy the goals of artificial intelligence, but by using data, by using experience, as opposed to just by programming, right? So the traditional way of getting that kind of information into the computer would be a person types a bunch of stuff in, and then that creates a program, and the program runs. But in machine learning, the idea is that we're going to expose a program to data and experience, and it's going to essentially program itself. It's going to create its own way of behaving that is in line with the data that it was trained on. In machine learning, there's a bunch of sub areas. One of them is called supervised learning, where the algorithms are trying to copy the examples that they're given. And so this is actually, for example, really important in the context of creating large language models, which are the basis of chatbots, because they're trained to predict the next word. So they're given data that says, here's a bunch of context leading up to now. What do you think is going to come next? And then the machine learning algorithm makes a guess, but the data actually tells it what the right answer was. Reinforcement learning, which is what you were asking about, and which is the sub area of machine learning that I've been most focused in, is it's very similar, trying to get machines to learn from experience, but instead of giving them right answers, they're just given scores. So it's kind of like, yay, what you did was good, or like, what you did was not so good. And it's not given the right answer. It's just given the opportunity to continue to explore, to try things out. And it's over time trying to figure out what behavior leads to high scores. And that's kind of the essence of reinforcement learning. Sometimes I call it learning from evaluative feedback. So feedback that's just saying how good something is, as opposed to supervised feedback or labeled feedback that says, this is what you should do.
Wow, that sounds a lot like our education system today, where we're like having teachers give student like basically scores on how much they know the content. So like on that note, I just wanted to ask like what are some like key research or like key development that we have done in this field? Like how do we evaluate exactly what scores these AI will get based on their output?
Yeah, so traditionally in the field, we've looked at problems where we have some kind of objective measure of goodness. So a great example is playing games. So things like chess and backgammon and maybe the game of Go, where at the end of the game, you find out whether you won. And that's definitive feedback. Like you can play however you want, but you're trying to maximize the probability that you're going to win. Because we can write a program that says, okay, well, this is what winning looks like in chess or backgammon or Go, we can actually let the program learn pretty much completely on its own. It can try out all sorts of ideas, and it's always the case that it's going to stay grounded in that definition of success. So games are special. Games are really interesting. How do we apply this idea in more general settings? So I've with my students, I've looked at some problems like, for example, the problem of being a movable solar panel. Right. So imagine a controller for a solar panel. It's trying to capture energy and transmit that energy to somebody who wants to store it or use it. And the system has to make decisions like, well, where should I point the solar panel? And it costs energy to do that, right? It costs some amount of its stored battery power to actually move, send energy to the motors to actually cause it to move. But on the other hand, if moving can actually get it to capture more energy, then maybe it's worth it. And so we can apply reinforcement learning as a technique to this, where we use energy, net energy, as the reward function, as the measure of goodness. So the more energy it's able to bring in, even if it costs energy to do what it's having to do, the better. Other students have looked at things like stock market trading, right? Where there, the measure of goodness is money or dollars or whatever currency. And so those are the cases where reinforcement learning applies most directly. Now, it's also being used in modern chatbots, and I can say a little bit about that if you think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be great, like, especially, trying to discover what sort of benchmarks we're using to evaluate.
Yeah, no, that's great. So it's worth pointing out that for there's a lot of websites that use reinforcement learning in their decisions about what content to show a person. So for example, a site like Netflix is trying to show you videos that you're going to likely like, you're going to want to watch. And so they've experimented with lots of metrics, lots of different measures of goodness. One of them is, well, what's the probability that if I show it to this person, it's going to be thumbs up or thumbs down. Turns out, and that's how the site was structured from the very beginning. But it turns out that it's kind of annoying. Like people don't like to give the ratings. It's kind of extra work for them. They just want to watch what they're going to watch. And so the Netflix people were like, well, I think what's really good is as a stand-in for that is how long do they watch, right? So if it's a video and they like that video, then they'll keep watching it. If they don't like it, they'll turn it off. And so we can use watching time as a measure of goodness. And that's good, but it's not exactly the right answer and it can lead to weird behaviors. So the same kind of metric used in YouTube, for example, because they had the same kind of idea there, ended up causing the system to tend to show people videos that make them angry. And the reason for that is because not only will people watch the videos that make them angry and so like stare at them until they're done, but then they'll stay on the site and keep watching more videos that make them angry. And so I think the designers originally were thinking, oh, well, this was trying to be our measure of reinforcement learning goodness, but maybe it wasn't a very good one. But then it caused all sorts of other problems downstream. And so I think it's a really hard problem to decide what is a good measure of goodness when you're not talking about something relatively straightforward like a game.
So for all these like different types of like reinforced learning, like are we seeing these in large like for example, are companies like Google and deploying this in like YouTube or whatever to like get people to watch certain videos with based on like large algorithms?
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely being used at Netflix and Google and YouTube, any company where they have to make recommendations, the recommendations tend to be driven by these metrics. Because what's the alternative, right? The alternative is that some person has to decide you should watch this and you should watch that. And that's how the world was for many years before everything was online. There were editors at a newspaper that would decide, you know what, we're going to print this story. We're not going to print this other story. But then those same set of stories went to everybody, right? It wasn't the case that was being tailored to individual readers. Now that we're tailoring to individual readers, it just doesn't scale to have a human being making those decisions. So you have to do something. And reinforcement learning algorithms have really played that role in a lot of places. It's also worth mentioning that these reinforcement learning type algorithms are used in the creation of chatbots as well. And it may not be obvious why they would do that or how they would do that, but it turns out to be a really key step because when language models were first being developed, these highly accurate, trained on terabytes of information kind of language models, what they were learning to do is just guess the next word, and so you can kind of get them going in a direction, and then they can just keep spinning out words and they feel like conversations, but they weren't really being trained. They were being trained on all the text on the internet. So there wasn't anything particularly conversational about it. There's conversational text on the internet, but there's also movie scripts and there's also just people ranting. Like we didn't want it to just be ranting, doing things like you might do on Reddit or something like that. We wanted to engage in a conversation. And so what people figured out is that you can start with a model that's trained to just predict the next word and kind of mimic whatever text it's got. But then you can use reinforcement learning ideas to get it to generate text that people might like. And so the way that they do that is they actually collect a lot of data on, hey, a person entered in this query. This is what the chatbot said in response. What do you think? And they had people doing the rating. Now, that's different from a board game, right? In a board game, there's just an objective who won. In this, it's like, well, we give it to a person, the person makes a judgment. And they seem to tend to like responses that are very flattering, right? It's like, oh, that's a really good question. You were very smart for having asked that question. And so now we have these chatbots that are they're very accommodating, but they kind of are suck ups, right? They're actually doing things that aren't potentially the right thing. They're doing things that just made whoever was doing the ratings happy. And I think that's it's not great. Like, and there's all sorts of downstream bad effects of that as well.
Wait, like, I think it's very interesting that you said how like we're training all of these chatbots and different models with like information data that we find online. So on that note, like since that's kind of like directly engineering what these models could be, like what if we can use like reverse learning in the other direction. Like we can use it to determine like the mechanistic interpretability of like certain models and how they can like how they think and evaluate themselves.
Yeah. Okay. You brought up the term mechanistic interpretability. So this is an idea that says, hey, we actually don't know how these large language models are making their decisions about what words to spit out. Maybe we should figure that out. Like maybe we should actually look in the guts of them and see what their calculations are, because they're really just giant programs. They're huge, huge programs that no human being wrote. But they're still programmed and they're still executed. They still run and they still make decisions. Maybe we could try to understand them. And so mechanistic interpretability gets down into the guts of what these chatbots, these language models are doing, and tries to make some sense out of it. That's yeah, there's a lot of work going on in that space. It's generally done by people being scientific, right? Actually generating a hypothesis and then checking against the model. It's really interesting because I've been a computer scientist my whole career, which is now like, I don't know, 30 plus, maybe 40 years. And a computer scientist, but I was never a scientist, right? Most of what happens in computer science isn't like science, like the scientific method. It's more like it's technical, right? It's a computer technical, but that doesn't sound as good as scientist. So I'm glad that we're called computer scientists, but the fact of the matter is, it's not really about science. One of the things that's really interesting about this mechanistic interpretability is it's computer scientists doing science on these programs that no human being wrote. So we really are acting a lot like scientists, and that means that we have to make guesses and then run experiments and then see if the experiments support or or undermine our assumptions. And it's really exciting. I think it's really interesting because a lot of us aren't trained. Like, of course, we're science adjacent. We all took a physics class. Like, we've seen science happen, but professionally, that's not what we do. We don't make those kinds of hypotheses and then do experiments to test them. But that's actually a really important part of the kind of work we're doing now in the age of chatbots.
I guess then my question would be like, since like we're talking about how we can like dig down into like the guts of all of these chatbots and figure out how they work, like is there any sort of connection between that field onto like reinforced learning on like how we can develop more effective models or like better models or like predict how they're gonna work in the future?
So, right, I hear what you're saying. I don't think we're in a position now that we can turn over that kind of analysis to the machine. This is why I was trying to emphasize this notion that it's like science. This is the same reason that we don't have computers trying to figure out the laws of physics. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for computers to be generating and testing these hypotheses. I mean, not that it doesn't make sense. I think your question is a good one. I just think we're not there yet. Like, it requires really good scientists, like human beings that are experts in this field. I'm currently involved in a project with a bunch of people who have published in mechanistic interpretability, and I want to contribute to it, but they just know so much more about that topic than I do. So, like, even me with my decades of experience, I feel like a student. Like, I feel like I'm just learning for the first time. How do people try to make sense out of this kind of data? And so, yeah, I don't think reinforcement learning is ready to help with this quite yet.
Okay, I see that. Like, of course, we need a lot more like cooperation with these different, with like these two different groups of people. And then like, also on like on another hand, like I was doing some research into reinforced learning, and I see that there are like various different types of approaches that we can use to like help these AIs develop, like to develop a form of AI that like we want. So could you like go down to a little bit more detail to help us explain what are different approaches that we can take to achieve this?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so if we're talking about trying to get chatbots to behave a certain way, reinforcement learning comes up in two different ways. And it was really just this past January that the second way started to get experimented with. But now I think it's a central part of the way these models, as they're called, are developed. And so the first piece of it is what I was hinting at before, which is referred to as reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF. So in reinforcement learning from human feedback, people make ratings saying how good they think responses are to different questions. So this is again what I was talking about before. The way that it's actually done is they gather a whole lot of data from people judging what's good responses and what's bad responses, and then they train a supervised learning model to make those predictions, to basically automate the judgment making. So they use examples of people making judgment so that the program can then make judgments about what's good output and not. Then they use that as the evaluation or the reward function, kind of like the goal in a board game, to get the model to learn to be more like that, to generate the kinds of responses that give high scoring answers. So that is what it is. It turns out to be a really important step. I think it has some flaws to it because it isn't really very objective. It's really just people's reactions to things, and it seems to be sometimes encouraging these models to be more, more flattering than they should be, and also sometimes to just lie convincingly because it's easier than telling the truth sometimes. But and they don't generally say I don't know because people don't love that. It's like frustrating to be told I don't know. So those are rated low. And so of course we get these bots that just pretend they know the answers even when they don't. But there's another piece that really came in line online January or so, maybe December, where companies are saying, "Hey, we have this mechanism where we get chatbots to talk to themselves, kind of like it's called chain of thought reasoning, but it's sort of like they're just chattering, like kind of talking themselves through a process. And so instead of just saying Hanbo and Michael each have 3 apples, how many apples are there altogether? And it's supposed to spit out. Instead, internally, it has a little conversation. It's like, oh, well, Hanbo, that means Hanbo has apples, and Michael has 3 apples, and so 3 plus 3 is 6. So the answer is 6. And so that chain of thought, that little reasoning process is hidden, but it's happening behind the scenes. That turns out to be really useful for getting chatbots to answer harder questions, right? Things that they just can't shoot from the hip and just answer. If it has to kind of think it through, this is a really productive way of doing that. And what people discovered is, well, for some of those kinds of problems, like for example, multiplying big numbers or solving mathematical problems, first of all, they require that kind of self-talk, that chain of thought reasoning. And second of all, if it's math, there's a right answer, and we can actually get the system to evaluate itself. So we can feed it with thousands and thousands of automatically generated problems and then generate that evaluation automatically. We don't need a person to make a judgment because, this number times this number is that, and we don't have to ask anybody for their opinion on it. We can just test it. And so this is now something that's been incorporated into a lot of these sort of deeper reasoning chatbots, is that reinforcement learning is used to train their chain of thought reasoning for the kinds of problems that have objective answers.
Well, thank you so much for like your insider knowledge on this topic. Like I know it's probably new for like many people out here, but I still think that like it's a very promising field probably for most hackers or for like anyone watching this video that wants to pursue. But like I think that's probably enough on like reinforced learning. So I think we should transition to a new topic. So now I think one question that I really want to ask you is like in this generation, this era of AI, so how should like an educator like you or like universities or high schoolers, how should we approach and view AI like when students may be actively abusing it?
Yes, right. So this is a big issue across the world, really, as this kind of tool has become available to everybody. It kind of is an automatic cheating machine. The reason for that is not because they were built to cheat, but they're built to be able to take basically a scenario and then produce a response to that scenario. And so much of what we do in educational circles are our evaluations, our homeworks, like they almost all have that form. Here's a setup, now give me a picture. Or here's a setup, now give me an answer, give me a number, give me a story, give me an essay. So much of what we do is exactly aligned with the way generative AI is structured. So generative AI, of course, being these kinds of programs like chatbots that can produce outputs given like textual descriptions or other kinds of descriptions. And so this is really problematic because it's just so easy. You almost can't not cheat. And so this is undermining our ability to teach people. I think we're all worried about that, but I actually just took a new job this summer at my university. I was given the role of associate provost for artificial intelligence. But if you probably don't know what a provost is, I didn't really know what a provost was. Associate doesn't make it any clearer. But the point is that my job is to help coordinate efforts at the whole university around AI. So not just in computer science, which is my field, where we have issues as well, but really across all the departments, all the pieces of the university. Universities are really complicated objects. They have, of course, have professors, they have students, but there's also staff members. There are people who are basically police officers. There's people who are basically running restaurants, like the dining halls are making food all the time. They're all part of that university community, and AI is really impacting everybody across the entire university. So it was decided that we should have somebody doing that, and they picked me. So I'm very flattered, and I take this very seriously, but there's many, many tricky things. And so the question that you asked about is the issue around how can we be thinking about it in the classroom? Because this is where we're seeing a lot of impact. And of course, at a university, that's a really central part of our mission is to educate people. I think at first people were mainly concerned about the notion of, well, this makes it really hard to grade homeworks because suddenly people who had trouble stringing words together are now wonderful writers and they can express these thoughts in flowing prose. Like that's weird and we don't know what to do with that. But I think where we are now, where professors are now, is very much worried that by having access to these chatbots, students are not learning. They're not practicing their writing because they can just outsource it. They're not reflecting critically. They're not like thinking of like, what could be wrong with the thing I just said? Oh my gosh, I had a student send me an email the other day that said, hey, I really want to take your class. There's more people interested in taking my reinforcement learning class than we had seats in the room. And so I was getting a lot of these requests, like, please let me in. I want to come. I want to be part of this class, which again is wonderful. And we looks like we're going to be able to accommodate everybody. So I'm really glad that I didn't have to turn anybody away. But the student sent this request and said, I really enjoy how you were talking about probability theory on Tuesday, and you were talking about reinforcement learning. And I was like, oh, okay. Which day was I talking about reinforcement learning? Because I didn't actually talk about reinforcement learning yet. It was just probability theory, but it took me 2 classes to get through the one lecture. But the website didn't say that. So if he had been in class, he would have known that. And he said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I fed the syllabus of the class into a chatbot and had the chatbot write the email. And I sent you that email and I didn't read it. I was like, oh my gosh, like if like you wanted to kiss up to me and tell me what a great professor I is and how much you want to be in the class. Used to be, I could count on students to do that. Like if they were going to kiss up, that the least they were going to do themselves. No. That's all being outsourced to AI now. And so it's troubling, right? Because they're giving up. They're not even trying to write. They're just asking the chatbot to do it and not even looking at the responses. I think this is leading to people not developing those skills, not maintaining those skills, and becoming very sloppy and very lazy about the thinking. And so I now have conversations with people sometimes where I ask them a question and their faces just go blank because they don't know how to answer questions anymore. They actually end up typing into the machine and then spinning their computer around and letting me read ChatGPT's answer to the question that I asked the person. That's not good, right? It's not just that you're cheating and getting a good grade. It's you're actually undermining the ability to ever learn anything. And so this is the thing that we're really, really worried about. I think on the positive side, there's not a lot of positive side, but on the positive side, I think students are really starting to clue into this. They realize that they're being harmed. They're asking us to give them guidelines so that they can actually avoid some of the pitfalls around using these incorrectly and using them in ways that harm themselves. So I think we're going to get to someplace better, but right now we're kind of at a low point, I think.
I mean, that's pretty relatable since like I'm also one of those like AI users, but I'm also one of those people who like figure out that by just relying on AI, our grades will probably get tanked. I can't learn anything. And so I think I've developed like a new form of method. Like I can feed all of these information that I don't know into a chatbot, such as like Gemini and like Google or Claude. And then once it gives me an output, I think like it's probably better for students to like look over all the content to like understand it and then edit it before they try to like do anything with it. Like, would you agree with
Yeah.
that?
I think that's better certainly than just mindlessly entering things in and passing that text along. My guess, and I don't think we've done the studies yet. Studies are just starting, like research on this is just starting. And there's a couple studies, for example, a study out of MIT that showed that people's brain regions start to shut down when they have the chatbot write too many essays for them. Like their brains become less active. And that's just like we should all be horrified to know that this is happening. Like our brains are being undermined by this process. It's not just that the output is worse, but like you could see it in the brain scan that the brain's just not, it's just too lazy to even try to think. So I think that, yes, I do think that's better. But I think the thing that will turn out to be better still is you write the email or whatever, the essay, the answer yourself first. Then have the chatbot critique it. Say, here's where you could do that better. And here's why it's better. And I think what that will do is, first of all, you're still getting that practice in, you're actually entering in, you're still going to get a better answer because the chatbot is still going to help you. But if it's helping you by saying, here's a better thing and here's why, right? As opposed to having it right for you and then just saying, here's what I think is a good answer. You can do what you want with it. This is like, here's how you can think about this differently. Here's how you can train your brain to be even better. And I think that is a pathway towards these tools not making us dumber, but actually making us smarter. And that's where we want to end up. We want to end up better as a result of using these tools. I mentioned before the game of Go and chess and backgammon. Computer programs can now play all those games better than the best human beings. But they can also be used as a tool to help you learn how to play that game better. So you can set up scenarios and you can see what move that the program will make, and you can learn from that. And I think the same thing is true for the use of chatbots in writing, that we can actually get them to help us be better.
On that note, like I think, yeah, I also agree that AI should be incorporated into like our educate, like the actual learning process and not just like be abused all throughout. So like, what are your views on some teachers or professors saying that they don't allow AI in the classroom at all?
Yeah, I completely understand that because as we were just discussing, it could very well be used in a way that's harming the students' learning. And the professors really want the students to learn. Like, this is not an easy job. It's not the best paying job. Like, we do it because we believe passionately in helping new people develop their skills. And so it's really, I think it hurts them. Like, it probably physically hurts them to see their students becoming dumber by virtue of this tool. And they want to stamp it out. I don't think that's going to be, like, I understand that that's the answer in the short term for some people. I don't think that's the long term answer. And it's going to take some time for people to get on board. And we're going to need to have shown, hey, this is a real productive way of using the tool. This isn't a non-productive way of using the tool. But boy, banning it outright is just a mess because you can say, well, it's not okay. Like, don't use AI at all. Okay, how are you going to catch me? And there are tools that claim to be able to say, oh, this was written by the AI program, not a person. But those tools they're certainly not 100% accurate. They're, in some cases, very inaccurate. Like, it's just a coin flip. It's just going to guess, like, yeah, that wasn't AI. And so we can't really use it as an enforcement tool. So we can't really tell whether you did the thing that we said we didn't want you to do. We just have to take your word for it. Like, I don't see how this is a sustainable practice. Like, it doesn't work. It's just not going to work. And so we really need to somehow figure out, first of all, I think what a lot of people are doing is creating new kinds of homeworks that the chatbots are terrible at. And that's kind of clever, right? In the sense that if we can undermine the ability of the chatbot to give the answer, then we don't have to worry about this issue. Other people are doing things like, well, okay, you can use the chatbot, do whatever you have to do. But at the end of the semester, we're doing a sit down, write on paper final. And so if it's not in your head, you're not going to do well on that. That's another mechanism. And hopefully that'll keep people honest or at least learning. And so so many things are being tried now. I think in the next couple of years, we'll have a sense of which things actually help.
I think that's like a very good like pioneer step that we can see in like education, how AI is going to help us. And so I think we should probably broaden out our scope. Like instead of just AI in education, what do you see like AI's position will be in like maybe the job market or maybe like the economy in the next decade or so?
Yeah. So one of the differences between working and being a student is that when you are working, your output is kind of what matters, right? We're not like, well, I generated this way. Like, I don't care. I just like, I'm paying you to do a thing. If you did that thing, then you did that thing. It needs to be high quality. And a lot of times chatbots can help people and then produce actually kind of low quality work. But nonetheless, like, I'm actually paying you for the thing. Learning is not like that. Learning is, well, sometimes professors or teachers will ask you to do the thing, and it's not because they want the thing. It's not because they actually want an essay on Robert Louis Stevenson, right? That's not the point. The point is that they want you to go through the process of generating it because they think that's going to help you. So it is interesting to look at the differences between the classroom and the office. It is absolutely the case that people are using these chatbots and these AI tools in offices to try to make things more efficient. There's some early indications that in some cases this can actually be really helpful, make people more efficient, make them be able to produce the thing that they need to produce more quickly with less effort. That's all great. There's also some studies that are suggesting that the act of having to look over the shoulder of the AI, right, it's producing an answer, and then you have to go and like fix everything, in some cases it's slowing people down while making them think they're going faster. So this is happening on the coding side. So people are employing chatbots that can write code for them. And at the end, they'll say, "Oh, thank you for letting me use the chatbot. I was 20% faster." When we measure them, and they were actually 20% slower. So it is complicated, right? The way that these things are showing up in the workplace. But I do think that it's probably a trend that's here to stay. That to the extent that these tools can be integrated into the work that people are doing, that's how it's gonna be. And we're gonna have to be more productive using these tools. And I can't imagine in most offices people saying, "Oh, no, 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 we ban the use of AI in this context." That's another reason that we have to not do it in classrooms, because this is a real world tool. This is a thing that people are actually using. It hurts the students not to give them some exposure and practice and an appreciation for it.
Hmm. But like personally, like I think that AI is very, very good in like corporations and companies to like increase productivity and such. But I've heard like around me a lot of outrage about how AI is causing like tens of thousands of unemployment like here in the US. So like from a point of like a computer scientist, like what are your views about like in the future how employment is gonna work or like at least adapt to this like new AI?
Yeah, so it's super interesting, right? Because all throughout history, throughout human history, whenever there's a new technology that helps make people more efficient, there are job losses associated with that. There's fewer people that are needed to do that job anymore. And if that's the job they were doing, they don't have a way to make a living on that anymore. Historically, things bounce back, and there's better and worse ways of handling that transition, but there always is a transition. It is not the case that people just remain unemployed and unemployable forever. New training happens, new uses happen, new ways of people bringing their creativity happen, and the system adapts, right? People and humanity adapt. Some people are concerned that this is different because it's getting at some very fundamentally human kinds of activities. Used to be, we have a better shovel, you can dig faster now. Like, I mean, digging is a thing that people do, but it's not. It don't need anybody to do digging. It's not like the shovels take the place of people. It just makes them more efficient. Where some of these tools feel like they can actually take the place of people. So we don't know, right, whether that's actually true. It definitely seems to be the case that there are companies that are firing people and saying we'll just replace them with AI. But that's such a new thing that we don't know whether they're actually harming the companies are harming themselves by doing this. Like, if they fire the people and they employ chatbots, they're gonna save money in the short term, but in the longer term, they may be producing a lower quality product, and their whole company might implode because nobody wants to buy their stuff anymore because it's slop. Right. So we don't know. We don't really know which of the sectors that where you can actually do this rationally. We know that people are doing it. We know that companies are firing people and replacing them with AI, but we don't know which of these moves are rational and sort of reasonable from the company's perspective, and which are suicidal. Right. Like, they were going to go out of business anyway. We might as well try this one last thing. Oh, that didn't work. So we don't know. We don't know. But it is absolutely the case that we need to understand what the impacts are. We need to be ready to adapt to them. I think that in many cases, it's not going to completely replace all the people, but it will make some people more efficient, which means there'll be fewer people employed in a given sector. We need to be compassionate about that. I think companies can't just be, or governments really can't just be callous and say, well, I guess you weren't important, right? Like, we're human beings. We're all part of the society together. We have to support each other. So finding ways to do that feels acceptable, um, I think that's where we end up having to go.
I think that's like a very thoughtful, very, very like well-rounded approach to how we should like to see the future. And then like speaking of like approaches on how we can adapt it to the future, like what are like your views on maybe because like based on my interviews with a bunch of other professors in the past, like they all seem to suggest that cooperation with large AI sectors in China or like
Mm.
could be very beneficial to like both countries' development. Like putting politics aside, like do you think cooperation with like Chinese researchers will be very, very like helpful in the future?
That's a really interesting perspective. Yeah, I mean, I've spent almost my entire career as an academic, and the whole academic ethos, like the way that we think about the world, the way that we just imagine things working well, is when people from all over the world gather together and share their ideas and benefit from each other. And so, in academic circles, like in my field of AI, machine learning, we have an international conference on machine learning called ICML, National Conference on Machine Learning. Very creative name. People from all over the world come to this conference, and nobody pays attention really to, or at least traditionally, we didn't really pay attention to national boundaries. It was just, we're just all scientists. And scientists are really interesting people because they are, in a sense, competing with each other. Like I want to invent the thing before you invent the thing. And so we're fighting. But at the same time, as a group, we're actually working together. We're all moving the knowledge frontier forward. And like if you quit the field and I am in the field all by myself, that's not good for the field and it's not good for me. Like I need my competitors to be my cooperators too. It doesn't mean we have to do everything together and we have to agree on everything. It means that we all need to be able to share results and have this sort of friendly competition, right? Where we're actually all trying to move the frontier forward. And I want it to be me who moves it forward, but it has to move forward. All right. So that's the academic model. But the last 3 years, I actually spent working in the US government. And there's a lot of concerns there. And I think some of them are legitimate, right? It's to the extent that working together with people who actually like want to destroy you. I'm not saying that that's China's perspective, but traditionally, the whole idea of nations fighting with each other is, well, we're competing more than we're cooperating. We're actually trying to find a way to outmaneuver the other and get more power and get more resources. And so there's concerns about like, well, maybe this kind of open sharing of science is actually harmful. We haven't, in the U.S., the attitude towards China is weird and complicated, especially at the moment. But nonetheless, academic circles are still like the big AI conference called AAAI, the Association for the Advancement of AI, is going to be held in Asia this year, and we're getting huge numbers of papers from Chinese researchers. So it's still happening. The cooperation is still happening, at least at the research level.
Well, I mean, on that note, like, in the future, when we're raising like new AI developers from like on our part, you think like we should be teaching them, we should put aside all of our differences and then like do research and like just focus purely on academics and the future of this field alone? Like, would that be a great approach to it?
I mean, there is an argument, right, that says this is more important than all of us. This is something that we all need to be working on together. And there's some people who feel like AI is the most significant invention that humanity has ever made because the thing that makes us special compared to other animals is our intellect. To the extent that we can actually magnify that, amplify it, and spread it, like that's what could be more human than that. That said, like my perspective is we're talking to a great degree about companies, and companies are also very competitive. They're in many ways more competitive than cooperative. Though, of course, we're all working in a society together, and one company destroying all the other companies actually leaves us all poorer. So we do want the companies to at least work within a framework that they're not gratuitously harming each other. But we do want them to compete. Like we do want each of them to be trying to come up with a better answer and share it with, to their customers. So I don't think it's realistic to say, well, if we just train all the researchers to just be like, yay, we're all in this together. I think you have to have both mindset. I think it's just built into us as human is that, yes, we are all part of the same community, but yes, we also are competing within that community. And that's okay. Like that's actually super healthy. But it's when you go too far to one side or the other that things really break down. If we're just competing with each other, like I want you dead no matter what. Like, I don't even care what happens to you as long as you're out of the picture. Like that's not healthy. And that leads to a very bad dynamic. But also saying, hey, like I'm going to share absolutely everything, every idea that flits through my head. I'm just going to tell you what I'm thinking because I don't want to hide it from you. Well, that doesn't lead to goodness either because then people start to take advantage of each other, right? It's not, that's also not healthy. So we have to teach a harder lesson, right? Not a lesson of like, let's all get along, but a lesson of let's all get along within the constraints of acknowledging that we're also competing with each other. And that's a more complicated, more nuanced message, but that's reality.
Well, I think that's a very good analysis on the field that we have and like the ground that we should stand on. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So before we end for today, is there any sort of parting message or inspiration that you might have for all of my fellow hack clubbers out here?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. I think it's really important that everybody feel engaged and empowered and to strike this cooperative, competitive kind of perspective. And I do think that we can have fun with it, right? Like to the extent that we are thinking about the bigger picture, thinking about where we're all going as a society. Think about your half people, right? They're interested, they're engaged, they're trying to figure out how to do cool things. And that's fantastic. And we should support each other in that and challenge each other when we're doing that, but in a way that is ultimately supportive. And so, yeah, I think AI, the future of society depend on both of those things depend on people's attitudes. And I think that that sort of positive, helpful attitude is really important to the world that we live in.
Well, thank you so much for your message for all my fellow hack clubbers out here. Once again, thank you, Professor Littman, for joining us in this Ask Me Anything. And then for everyone watching, if you want to know more about Hack Club, just go to hackclub.com and then you'll find more information there.